So that was certainly a fun project. As it turns out, we ended up with 4 videos, and I have to tell you that they were totally on the fly because I was doing nothing more than preparing some sauces for the family for the next several months. And Isabella happened to be walking by, so I asked her at that point to grab my phone and start videoing me for, she said, for what? And I said, I don't know. We'll see what happens. And so we started doing that, and we ended up with these 4 videos that I ended up posting on Facebook. So let me just real quickly, just a brief history. You know, my mother, Larry Pino, was an incredible cook and taught my sister Joy and myself all of these wonderful recipes. And each of us has modified them somewhat as we've gotten feedback in the families and from friends. But these represent, from my standpoint, some minor modification of Mom's sauces. But really, truthfully, the sauces themselves are just tremendous on their own. If you'll notice, by the way, in the recipes that I'm about to post for you, clearly we had to have some type of unit. And it's a little bit difficult to get down to the smaller units because when I do the sauces, I do a great big vat. I forgot exactly what it is. It could be even, I don't know if it's 20 quarts makes sense, but it's one of these great big pots. So I do quite a bit for a long time. So in trying to bring it down to some type of unit that makes sense, you'll see them here, but the different portions for each of these things might be a little bit off. So it's going to be based upon a little bit of your taste. Okay, so let me go through. I'm going to go through each one of these 3 sauces, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the meatballs, and then we'll be done. So the first one I'm posting is Mom's Milanese sauce, and this is what we used to call the quick sauce. In other words, it's a sauce which is just simply a wonderful Italian sauce that you can use for anything. If you want to just simply use this sauce and you want to just put it for pasta, you can do that. On the other hand, if you want to use it as a foundation for this sauce plus meatballs, and I'll make a comment about that in a second, you can do that. Or, if you'll notice at the very bottom of this recipe, I indicate it's a foundational sauce for other Italian dishes. So, for example, when I do a lasagna or I do a pasta al forno, this is the sauce that I use as the foundational sauce for those particular recipes, both of which, by the way, at some prior time in Facebook history somewhere, I actually posted the recipes for. If you take a look at all of those, I want you to know that I had just one 26 by 28 ounce container of chopped or finely chopped tomatoes, preferably the palmy container. That's really only one. To give you an idea of how much I actually do, I will do anywhere from 10 of the larger ones, which is about 2.5 of those 26 to 28 ounce containers, or clearly if I'm just using the 26 to 28, I'll actually put as many as 16 to 20 in the pot that actually ends up getting mixed in. And so, you're going to use certainly always virgin olive oil. If you're going to be using the larger vat, the way that I handle the onions is I just simply cut them in quarters. Take the skin off on the outside so that you have a nice sweet portion of the sweet onion, and then you just simply make sure that you quarter them and then incorporate them. Just put them in the pot. The palmy stands for itself. Also, will use tomato paste. If you don't use a tomato paste, I tend to use the contadina tomato paste. What will happen is your sauce will be just a little bit too runny. And so you want to put some tomato paste in there to give it some salt and pepper. It's to taste. I always use the shaved Parmesan cheese. I don't use the grated, and I also don't use that, whatever that thing is called, it's powdered. I'll wait for the end to put in the wine. I don't put the wine in the beginning. I usually put the wine in about an hour prior to finishing up on this. Sugar is to taste. I'll usually put somewhere around 1/4 cup, for example. If it's a great big vat, I'll put as much as about 1/3 of a cup of sugar in there, and it just simply kills a little bit of that acidity there. This is showing 1/4 cup of basil. I use a lot of basil, and I'll use usually for one of these large vats, I'll use as many as 2 containers of basil that you'll get at a public store or something of that nature. And I also increase substantially the amount of butter. I'll put at least a full stick in there for a vat, maybe even a stick and a half of that. The most important part that I want you to recognize about all of Italian cooking, but especially about these, is that you really need to do it slowly. It's not high heat, it's low heat. It's a simmer all the time, and give it plenty of time. So, I will do 6 to 8 hours for a large batch of this sauce. If you want to do it shorter, you can. For a small batch, you can do 2 hours. But the idea is to get some of the moisture out of the tomatoes, and you never want to be overheating them. So simmering works just fine, or if you want to do maybe a low simmer, you could, or even a medium simmer, you can certainly do that. Okay, so that's the end as far as Mom's Milanese sauce is concerned. Easy spaghetti, angel hair, any type of penne or ziti is perfectly okay. And again, as I indicated, a foundational dish for lots of the others. Let me talk a little bit about the Bolognese sauce. The foundation of the Bolognese sauce is, in fact, the Milanese sauce. So, in other words, if you want to do Bolognese sauce, that's all you do is you do the Milanese sauce. You're having it cooking in a pot, and then you go ahead and prepare the meat, which you're eventually going to put into the Milanese sauce in order to equal the Bolognese sauce. So everything that you see in this recipe about the Bolognese sauce is all about the meat. It's not about the tomato sauce itself, and you'll notice that there's nothing else in there. Rather than a pot, I don't actually use a pot. I use a pan. It's a frying pan, a great big frying pan, and you begin the process by putting your olive oil in there. And again, it's always going to be virgin olive oil. The purer the better. And you begin a slow heating of the olive oil. Once it's heated enough where it can actually start cooking, you go ahead and put your grated carrots and onions in there, and you want to grate them up, right, with one of those graters. And then you'll allow them to just begin to become transparent as it's cooking on the very bottom of this thing. The olive oil, by the way, is just enough to be able to cover the bottom so that it ends up sautéing the carrots and the onions. You don't want to have a whole lot, because if you have a whole lot, then your meat gets pretty greasy. At that point, when it's a golden color, go ahead and begin the process of adding on the ground meat. Notice that I have 3 different types. There's no magic to that. Sometimes, if I'm in a hurry, that's all I'll do, or I just want to put up a batch of this stuff, I just use the ground round, which is just simply the beef. But sometimes if I have time and, I go to the store for that particular purpose, I might do a ground veal and a ground pork, and I mix them together. You always want to make sure, though, that they're substantially lean, because you don't want that meat to be really greasy, if you will, or just too fatty. So the most I'll ever do is 15% fat. If you get down to 10% fat, by the way, then it starts to, it doesn't have quite the flavor that it does if it has some type of fat content involved. You've got your finely grated carrots and onions, and then you begin the process, by the way, as very slowly, once again, you're cooking your meat, but as it's starting to turn brown, you'll begin adding some milk. And I'll actually use whole milk in this particular case, not half and half. And as you're putting it in, it absorbs the milk, and you can actually see it getting nice and fluffy in the, I guess fluffy is a word for meat, in the frying pan. And it continues to absorb the milk until it's really nice and, nice and flavorful, and it looks fully brown, and it looks fully cooked. You don't have to overcook by a long shot, because remember, we're going to be putting all of this meat into the Milanese sauce, and it's going to end up being in the Milanese sauce for a couple hours. So you could just simply cook it so that it's a very light tan, if you will, and your meat's done. With that said, I want to make sure that, notice that I do indicate the fact that you'll want to make sure that you strain it in a colander. Because it does really, it's in the bottom of the frying pan, and it's really pretty greasy. So you'll take it out, you'll pour it into a colander, and then really shake that colander very strongly so that, that all the grease kind of drips out of it and so forth, and give it a little time to really get it out, and maybe you shake the colander a couple more times, and then you're all set to go. You put your meat in the Milanese sauce, it's in a separate pot, so that you've got a Bolognese sauce happening, and you simultaneously in another pot have just the Milanese sauce, so you end up with two of those. And in the videotape, you actually saw me doing that. To the left was the Milanese sauce, and then you also saw me doing the Bolognese sauce. Okay? So that's that one. As far as the alla vodka sauce is concerned, you have somewhat different. Mom did do alla vodka sauce. That was not one of her specialties. And so we tended to modify that over time. You have different type of tomato. You don't have the palmy tomatoes. These are the plum tomatoes. And again, I use a great big vat of this, not quite as large as the Milanese, because the alla vodka sauce is definitely an adult taste. My experience is, I'm not sure I've ever met a kid who didn't like Milanese sauce. Some may not like the Bolognese, but I don't know a whole lot of children who like the alla vodka sauce, possibly, obviously, number one, the vodka. But in addition to that, it also is a little bit spicier if you want to make it, certainly as spicy as I make it. So all of those are there. You've got you have your plum tomatoes, and I will use any number of those. Notice that I do use the Totoroso peeled plum tomatoes, and again, the contadina tomato sauce. When you take them out of the container, drain them. Because if you put it in your pot with the liquid that's in the container, then it gets way too wet. It gets way too, it's just not thick enough. So make sure that you have drained them completely and only put just the raw, if you will, peeled tomato in there. Love to put cherry tomatoes. The sweeter the better. And you'll be putting those cherry tomatoes in there and just double to triple the amount of cherry tomatoes than you have the plum tomatoes to give it a nice sweet taste in there. Typically in a big vat, I would end up putting about 3 jalapenos in there, which is plenty for a big pot, because I don't take the seeds out. So with that, the seeds will really give it that real taste. Notice that a relatively small container, is what I've talked about here, has 1 stick of butter. So you can only imagine I will do 2 to 3 sticks of butter in the larger vat, if you will, which really does give it that buttery taste. A little bit of sugar, not as much as you would use elsewhere, salt and pepper to taste. Always shaved Parmesan cheese. In this particular case, go ahead and put it into the sauce. Which is something I don't typically do for the other ones. With respect to the vodka and with respect to the half and half, what I would suggest to you is that you wait for a while, wait for a small container or small pot, you cook it for at least an hour, otherwise for more, you could cook it for several hours. I would not put the vodka in about 2 hours before the very end. If you're going to be cooking this thing for like 6 hours, as an example. Only after that, the very last thing that goes in is going to be the half and half, and you can do that about an hour prior to the end. This really gives you the opportunity to be able to, the vodka obviously is going to, by virtue of the fact that it's alcohol, so you don't want it to be in there the entire time, because it does change a little bit of the taste. And the half and half, you don't want it to be in there an awful lot of time either. So you'll put those at the end. Otherwise, you're in good shape. If you want to make it a little hotter, you certainly can. But this will give you a good flavor. The only other comment that I'm going to make is the other 2 sauces I don't blend with a mixer. However, this particular one I do, and the reason is that they are the whole tomatoes that I put in there. I put in the whole plum tomatoes. So if you really want to kind of give it a nice creamy taste and feeling, you probably want to use one of those, electric mixers or whatever, to be able to just make sure that you've got a solid consistency on that. Okay, almost done. So with respect to the final item, which are the meatballs, everything here is exactly as indicated. What you do is you just grab great big containers and just start putting the meat in there. It's a ground round, just like any other time I use beef. It's 85% lean, 15% fat. Throw in your dried breadcrumbs, your eggs. You'll chop up about a half a cup of the meat of sweet onion. You'll put your milk in there. I am never parsimonious with parsley. There's nothing like parsley inside a meatball. So feel free, if you want to use as much as a cup for this amount of, you certainly can. And then the balance of it is here. Mix it up really well so that you have a wonderful consistency, which will be pretty much red and green by the time it's all over. And then give yourself, it depends on what you do. When I'm doing lasagna, I will do the small meatballs. Same meatball, by the way, it's just that I make them very small, which is not at all the way that Americans typically do the lasagna. However, when I'm doing meatballs that I'm going to be using along with pastas, I don't also do the large ones, which is what you tend to see if you go to some maybe chain Italian restaurants out there. But typically it would be just a medium-sized meatball in there. If you remember from the videotape, I indicated that for a full container of the Milanese sauce, when I mix them somewhat in the mason jars, I'll do 5 of these medium-sized meatballs for a full container for adults. Okay, kind of like that. You put them, you bake them. Notice you're not frying them because you want to make sure that it seeps out. And then when you take them out at 400 degrees, it should take you only 15 minutes for a medium-sized meatball. You take them out and you put them on paper towels. And just because, again, I just don't like that fat taste. I also just take a paper towel and I just tap the top of the meatballs to see if there's any excess grease that I want to take out of those meatballs. And that's pretty much it as far as those meatballs are concerned. And notice what I did in the ball jars is I put, I had the Milanese sauce, and then for those people who want Milanese with meatballs, use Milanese with meatballs. Don't use Bolognese, because Bolognese by definition already has meat in it. So there's not a lot of reason to put meatballs in with a meat sauce. You can just do it with the Milanese, and it's an optional for people who don't want to have the actual meat. With the Vodka sauce, I never do that with any type of meat, and you don't really need to do that. And I think that's about all I have to say for any of these recipes. I had a blast doing this, by the way. It was over the Christmas holidays, so I wasn't thinking about a whole lot other than just thoroughly enjoying myself on these things and making lots of sauces. So I hope that this was valuable to you, and good eating. Let me know how it turns out for you, okay? Good to talk to you all, my friends. Talk soon. Bye.